Hello, everybody. Today is Sunday, March the 10th. The planet Mercury has just ingressed into Aries, and Venus is going to ingress into Pisces in a couple days from now on March 12th. And we just had a new moon in Pisces. Although, if you notice following these channels, I have not been doing the new moon or the full moon. I haven't been doing like 12 sign horoscope videos either. I've basically just been sticking to this format of talking about aspects and conjunctions and transits with the planets. And so today I'm not thinking so much about the recent new moon, but I'm thinking about the sun, and which is applying a conjunction to Neptune, which will be the focus of this video, as well as sort of reflecting on Venus's entry into Pisces in a couple days. Now, I just want to put out there before I get into it any further that obviously Pisces is a water sign. Obviously, this has to do with emotional things, intuition and feelings and things like that. And the presence of Saturn in this sign has added a bit of a emotional weight, which may feel a bit dreary or depressing. And I have been sort of, it's the weather too. It's like almost one of those things where we just had, I guess those daylight savings time just happened, I guess. Yeah, because this clock behind me isn't right. I still need to fix my clock. So, the whole thing about like it's almost as if like we've got the winter, whatever. The weather has been a bit gloomy, rainy. I mean, I'm not don't have anything against rainy days or gloomy weather, but there's also been certain things happening in the news which are saddening. And well, I mean, I find that I often get this thing going on myself, being the kind of person who is feels a bit more porous and open to things going on, that I will have sort of like these difficult feelings, and then I'm like, why do I feel so awful? And then I'll go and I'll look at the news and I'll like, oh, well, maybe I'm picking up on that going on right now. Or then I'll go and like, or like, I don't know why I feel like I'm in such a bad mood, and then I'll go and like, I live with my mom or my sister, and then my mom will be, maybe expressing some sort of emotion. I'm like, oh, maybe that's, but it's one of these things with Neptune is that it's kind of hard to like pinpoint exactly where the source of it is, and it could be maybe part of the heroic solar ego that wants to be like, I want to figure out exactly where these negative feelings are coming from so I can protect myself from them, so I don't have to feel the things I don't want to feel or whatever, right? But but I'm just gonna say there is some sort of certain heavy things going on, and I don't want to make light of them or anything like that. But just is like, I don't know. Do people still do trigger warnings? This will be before going more into this video, we will be dealing with things such as murders and suicides and other things which are dark and involve grief. And I'm sorry if also I don't know if my tone is too positive when it should be. Maybe that's another thing with Sun-Neptune, is that there's this kind of whatever. I'm not going to get into that right now. But one of the things that happened was that there's a murder in Ontario where a guy who was a recent immigrant from Sri Lanka apparently murdered a house full of people. And I'm just putting this out there that I normally wouldn't get into this kind of stuff, but in one of my previous videos, I was talking about making AI music videos, and I made a couple AI music videos, and honestly, I'm kind of like on the fence of whether I'm gonna like keep making AI music videos. It was kind of more of like, there's a couple of things behind this. That first of all, when I kind of had this impulse that I was gonna start making some AI music videos for some of these recordings that I haven't released yet. And then it wasn't until after, when I watched the Astrology podcast, that I found out that right at that time I started making AI music videos, was when this company that does OpenAI ChatGPT announced that they were launching a video AI program where you could, just as Midjourney, you can create images off of a prompt. They're a new program that can create whole videos off of a prompt. And so there's something about this where it was like, due to the sort of Neptune like intuitive thing, that it was like there's some way that maybe I was picking up on the whole hubbub around that I don't really follow the news that much. And I was just kind of like, oh, maybe this is with Mercury squaring Uranus at this point in time, maybe this is a good time for me to do these music videos. And then I just got into, I've heard other people talk about the idea of whether or not these AI image programs can be used as tools for divination, right? And I have to admit that there is sometimes some of the glitches that come up are interesting. Some of the time when it does something wrong. And there's a Coil album called Worship the Glitch, which is all about, like, to be honest, I haven't listened to this particular album that much, but I kind of like the concept of worshiping the glitch, or like there's something that comes, but I have to admit that it wasn't even a glitch, it was my own, well, I guess the glitches that I've been interested in is, like, as I mentioned in my previous video on it, is like how when you put two things in the same frame, how there's a tendency for the AI not to respect the boundaries and mix up things from one image to the other. And I made the example of a detective interviewing a Buddhist monk, and how by putting those two things in the frame, it makes the detective look more like a Buddhist monk. Or it'll make the Buddhist monk look more like a detective. And I haven't even included any of these images in my music videos yet. I was maybe, thinking of using these images for an ongoing series, and the detective would be investigating some mystery, and then you could have like a story with a plot and all these kinds of things. But when I was watching, my mother was watching television, and I walked across, and I was taken back to see on the television a Buddhist monk with a shaved head and orange robes talking about this killing that happened in Ottawa because the guy was a Sri Lankan guy who was a Buddhist, and it kind of just sort of like set off this resonant thing. Like, that goes a lot with this image that I was creating in AI, and I don't even know if I want to continue on that thread of where it was going. But it was kind of funny because it wasn't the program that generated this, it was my own idea of what to feed into the prompt, right? And then it was also the whole thing about even doing these videos in the first place. I was feeding off of this whole thing about OpenAI making a video program, but I'm not really clued into the current events very well, so I didn't even know that was a thing, but somehow it trickled into my consciousness in such a way that motivated me to subscribe to Midjourney and start making, music videos or whatever, right? And similarly on this note, I was thinking about, there have been often, I've been taking a certain approach. If you notice, these videos that I make are not edited in any way, right? They are completely raw and uncut. And I was thinking about this idea of, rather than trying to get a very, like, kind of a well-groomed, a well-edited, to be more loose and carefree, and just sort of be, because I have to admit, I have a lot of, like, Sagittarius Pisces placements, and some part of the problem, sometimes people say you have a big mouth, or you have to watch what you say, or you talk, but there's something about, like, when you put that together with the kind of intuitive influence of Neptune. And as I was saying in my last video, I was talking about Marshall McLuhan and how he had Sun-Neptune, and he had this kind of prophetic ability that maybe in just being open and just letting the process do its thing without trying to police every little thing about it, then unexpected things might come up, and you might be more, without trying to predict something, you might predict something. And so it might be better to just be unshackled and then just have this open space where I can talk and let things come up, and I don't have to worry about like trying to edit into the most precise, specific, perfect message of what my conscious mind wants the message to be, but rather let something organically come out of it, right? And however, there's a lot of things that happen where I'm making these videos and I'm talking about things, and then I notice stuff happen in current events, and I just keep pushing through, right? Without bringing it back into my channel, right? Like doing an overview of things that happened. And there's actually a number of these things. I don't know if I'm going to talk about them all in the video, but one of the things that happened is that before the pandemic, like one of the things that I'm dealing with is that like I grew up in a very musical family. Like my dad was a musician and I was around music a lot, and I've never been in a very successful band, or I don't really see myself as being that talented, but it's a kind of like obsession of mine that like I find it very, but I haven't, since COVID happened and I had this health crisis where I was sick and I was just out of it for a while. Like I haven't gone back into going to shows and stuff like that and concerts, and there's this whole collective thing going on around, like, and I've mentioned this too. I think for me, I relate this to having something to do with Saturn and Pisces, and having some bearing on, because Venus is going to ingress into Pisces, and luckily Venus is exalted in Pisces, which means that Venus is protected from the potentially negative influence of Saturn, and it'll be more like Venus is helping to improve the situation with Saturn and Pisces rather than being afflicted by it. But nonetheless, this Pisces area has been a sensitive point in my chart, and I've maybe spoken in other videos about feeling this sort of pressure to grow up, to act my age, to put childish things behind me, and all that kind of stuff. And I was kind of taken aback when I found out that a musician who I saw play live before the pandemic, I recently got news that this guy had committed suicide, which in some way, the guy made music that was more of this kind of like gothy, post-punk kind of style. His band was called The Soft Moon. And I have to admit that I went to go see what must have been like 2018, or I think it must have been 2018 that I saw them play. And I have to admit that I'm not the biggest fan of this band. I'm not like a crazy like super fan or anything, but I nonetheless, and when I saw them play, it was at a venue that, like, some venues are well designed so that they have like they have this sort of like ballroom kind of thing where the stage is like raised up and that the floor is lowered down. I was in some venue that didn't have this, and I honestly didn't even see the band very well. It was more like being in a thick crowd and listening to the music, but not having that much of a visual connection with what was going on. But I found out that this guy had committed suicide and stuff. And I had gone, and I had made this. I got the news of this right after I'd made a video that had something to do with Pluto, and I was talking in that video about Pluto having some bearing on music as being like the myth of Orpheus, right? About like how Orpheus was the guy who had to like come back, try to save his wife from the underworld, but he couldn't look back, and then he looked back, and then she got pulled in or whatever, right? Or that there's this sort of like this. I read from Deleuze and Guattari about how there's this kind of like potential fascism in music, and what he means by that is that the Deleuze and Guattari are talking about the fascism of Hitler and Mussolini and stuff like that, but specifically that like the idea that Hitler didn't just want to, make Germany into some kind of a superpower, that there's a side of what Hitler was doing that was outright kind of like suicidal, right? That it was like he was going to either dominate or he was going to go out in flames and die, and it was like the sort of like, and then you also saw this with like, you know, the same archetype maybe in the kamikaze pilots in Japan, right, where these young men were loaded into airplanes that didn't even have landing gear, and you're going to go out there and crash your plane into the U.S. naval ships and don't even think about coming back because it would be an act of cowardice. You have to go in a suicide mission, right? And so like that music, there's something about music that has this sort of like risk of, like, you know, there's all these suicidal rock stars, and I was kind of going off that theme in my video of, and then after the fact, I found out that this guy whose band I saw killed himself, and then decided, like, I hadn't even been up on this guy's most recent albums or anything like that, and I was listening to his most recent album, and one of the things that he did was that he made a music video for a song that, if I remember correctly, it's called Stupid Child, right? And it's made with a kind of like stop motion animation of the very simple kind of claymation kind of thing about a guy who has like an electric guitar, and he obviously sits in his bedroom and like writes songs and stuff like this, but he's dealing with the kind of internalized father figure who puts down his creative process as being childish and stuff like this. And it's sort of like, I mean, you could go all sorts of like Freudian directions with the whole child and adult thing, but this was also kind of sparked for me because I was just listening to, I didn't listen to very much of it, but I listened to the astrology podcast thing about the Unshaming the Zodiac signs, and they were talking about they're talking about, for one thing, I was watching the one on Scorpio, and Scorpio's ability, or has this tendency to be obsessive, or being passionate or something like that. And there's this kind of thing about like, I mean, it's kind of funny because like it kind of went in this direction where the person who was talking about it was saying that like there's a sort of shamefulness associated with not meeting the standards of like adult decorum, right? Which is really interesting because give me this connection back to the Deleuze and Guattari stuff, where they're talking about like their majoritarianism versus minoritarianism, and in the way that it doesn't, like, I mean, not to say that a majority in terms of having more numbers or having like that's where the majority of people are at, but there's this, you know, this typical kind of like social justice kind of discourse where you're talking about how the society is kind of modeled after I mean, you can even look at YouTube, right? Like YouTube has this, when you upload a video, it says, is this for kids or is this for adults, right? That we've got this sectioned off world of things that are for children, and then we have the adult world, right? And we kind of consider like children to be a kind of something that is subsidiary to the adult, or that, and then in the same way, and like Deleuze and Guattari put this in the same way as a kind of like where feminism goes with this, that like we have like, you know, like there's that James Brown song, it's a man's world, right? Like that the world is kind of structured in a way where the male, there's like the white male adult is like the subject of the world, and that all the woman and the child and even the animal are all kind of like secondary characters. And it's like, if as an adult male you are accused of being childish, it's like that's something to be shameful for, because you're not living up to the expectation of being the primary subject. You're like, I'm not the primary, you know, like solar hero figure, being adult, being mature, being unchildish, being human, not so the Deleuze is all about looking at all these ways that we diverge off of that into a becoming it's kind of been taken over by the whole trans discourse on whether or not you have to be gender conforming, or whether men have the right to a becoming woman, right? Or whether there is, or like, even if I am doing, what I find really interesting is that if I, one of the reasons why I don't post on Facebook anymore is because, like, there's a certain climate around of, like, male friends will make jokes about, oh, hey, Mercury's in Gatorade, and it's like, haha, this is all a bunch of, oh, astrology is just for a bunch of white women, right? So even in me doing this, like, if I'm making astrology videos, I'm in some way, in the mind of the popular consciousness, I'm participating in a becoming woman, right? And there's a certain thing, the same force is like, what I'm kind of confused about is, like, why there's something about the creative process that by even engaging the imagination, it tends to resonate with things like that are associated with childhood. And people, I mean, even Carl Jung, I got some Jung books up there. Carl Jung talks about how if you're doing active imagination work, there's often, you run into this thing about the inner child, or going back to childhood. And there's this whole conversation about, like, fairy tales being this access to the imagination. But there's this other thing that, like, you've heard that one where people say that, like, the normal person in North America is only using, like, 5% of their brain, or 10% of their brain, or something like. I have to admit that I'm no brain scientist. In my last video, I was mentioning this book, Sand Talk, and there's a little bit where he goes into this in this Sand Talk book, because he's talking about indigenous thinking, how indigenous people think, and how indigenous people experience the world, and what they see, and what they, how they kind of look at the colonial modernists in comparison, and what, trying to offer a different perspective, right? But there's this kind of idea that, like, there's something about modern society that has the effect of shutting down all these things that our brains can do to adapt into this very narrow vision of what life is supposed to be like as, fill in the blanks, an adult white male or whatever, right? And there's this kind of thing about, like, the idea that children are maybe more creative, or children are maybe more in touch with the imagination, or that, like, by doing anything that's creative, anything that, whether that's making music, whether that's making art, whether that's coming up with a story, we're somehow accessing this childhood creative drive. But then I find it bizarre that there can be this kind of voice that is like an adult voice saying that we need to stop doing this because it's infantile, or you have to grow up, or you have to, I'm just pointing this out because there's something going on with, like, Sun and Neptune as well. And I mean, there's multiple points about Deleuze and Guattari that are coming up for me around this. And one of them is basically this idea about deterritorialization and reterritorialization, right? And basically there is this kind of idea of, like, and it fits right in with this whole thing about New Age culture, because there's also the, this, and Pisces, the immutable sign, and, you're kind of embracing that we're just, like, grains of sand on the beach, and that all things are impermanent, and that all our structures are like castles in the sand that'll be washed away, and all this kind of stuff, and that anything you build won't last, and you have to embrace change and all this kind of stuff, and embrace letting go. And there's even there's I won't get into all this, but there's a certain thing that goes with this, that if we allow this, or we're all into allowing this process of embracing change and impermanence, and making the ego sort of submit to this kind of process, there's this kind of thing that Terence McKenna was also talking about this, where he was talking about the idea of like having a kind of a personal goal or purpose or direction in your life. And Terence McKenna says that like if you don't have this, then there's the risk of somebody else just somebody else who has a will, an idea of a purpose, just pushing that onto you, basically. If you don't have, or like, and this is what Deleuze and Guattari are saying, that if you allow yourself to become like, like the Eggman, or the unconditioned, just kind of pure awareness that just accepts everything, then what tends to happen is whatever structure that is there that isn't going through this process of allowing itself to decompose and whatever, if there's whatever structure that is persistent is just going to end up impressing itself upon you. So if you're all just loosey-goosey, I'll just accept everything and go with the flow, if there's some other structure that says, like, it could be anything, right? But if there's some stubborn structure that is like, oh, well, like says, I don't know, a man has to drive a pickup truck and shoot animals to be a man, then you're just going to be like, oh, well, I'm just accept everything and just go with what I accept what is. I embrace the situation, and if the situation is a thing telling me about what a man is supposed to be like, well, I have just let go of my own ego, so I will just. So there's this kind of thing that of like, there's this kind of idea that is like, I think a lot of people when they're in a bad situation may just say, like, are looking for, like, if I just get myself right with what the expectations of the world are like, or what the status quo, if I just like make myself resemble that which is most common of the status quo, I will be kind of like redeemed by becoming part of society or something like that. But I'm just like, my mind's kind of going this other direction now about the Neptune as a redeemer, right? And there's a certain way of like how the process of art can be redemptive by taking your story, by taking your situation and making it into a poem or a piece of art or a story. I've been reading some things that are like, I don't know if I need to go into exactly what, like, I also have this attitude where I can, there's all sorts of media, all sorts of stories, all sorts of things that I can consume that I don't have to like just use it for content in my astrology channel. I can keep it private. But there's certain things about your life that, even if it's just to read somebody else talk about it in their story, that you can be like, oh, well, I'm not the only person who has been frustrated with this situation. I'm not the only person who's felt doubts about these kinds of things. I'm not the only person who has been, struggle. And it's like, rather than feeling so alone, you can see yourself not only as being, other people go through this stuff as well, that you can also look at it historically and be like, this isn't even something that's new. Or that you could see, like, looking at these intergenerational patterns and stuff like that. People have been dealing with this forever, right? There's something about that which redeems it, because you don't have to feel like so burdened as it's just you dealing with this kind of situation, right? And at the same time, there's this, so that kind of, I think that there are things in the, like, I've been dealing with, I don't like to just like focus too much on the side of it that has to do with mental health, but that is part of my life situation, is that I do have, I don't know, I don't like the whole diagnostic system, so I don't like to get hung up on that, but there is something about the way my mind works that I can tell is probably different than how other people's mind works, right? And one of the things that I've noticed about that is that, or I've heard people that don't even have this stuff going on express the idea that maybe the people who are considered mad or crazy or having psychotic breaks, that they're in some way just processing these forces that are happening on the mass scale, that the whole collective is somehow affected by these forces, right? And that with the Sun-Neptune dynamic, there's this kind of like I said, like I've been here having a lot of emotions and like difficult feelings, and I just look at the news and I'm like, well, no wonder the world is kind of messed up right now, right? And then I look at my own struggle with this sort of like, there's some voice that says there's all these things that I do that make, I mean, I don't know, I'm not entertaining very, like I'm going to become a rock star, or I'm going to become some famous celebrity or something like that. But it's strange, like why I bring up the thing with the guy with the soft moon. It's strange to see people who are in that position where they are actually successful, that they are doing, having records that get good reviews, having successful tours, having media recognition, being respected as being the guys who are filling that role in society, that these people are also not only affected by this voice that says to make music or to be creative is you need to stop this and grow up. They're so, like, you can see it in the guy's music video that this guy is somehow so affected by this that this is playing in. I mean, I think the guy may have also had different, I don't know, abuse. I don't know what the whole guy's story is with his. He could have had a very abusive relationship with his father. Maybe that plays into it. I don't know, right? But like my dad was a musician, and he played music the very same day that he died, right? Like he never saw, like the aging and growing old as being this thing. Like you had to stop being creative, you had to stop making music, you had to stop being playful, you had to amputate the inner child or the inner creator in order to be a respectable adult. I mean, other people, maybe different people are just afflicted by different things. I mean, like he died over 10 years ago, but he was being creative and expressing himself and all right up until the very end, right? And like, I just think that I'm just looking at what is going, like something about the Saturn and Venus dynamic. Something has come up for me is that, I don't know. I'll take a risk here because there's certain things that I don't like to talk about publicly on YouTube because it's kind of vulnerable. But like one of the thing is like the whole issue of like dating in your 30s, which I mean, I guess I did, I had a girlfriend for I'm not going to get into the issues around the relationship that I had most recently that I'm not in anymore. And I'm basically, I'm not going to get into that here publicly, but like the whole thing, I don't like using dating apps for this reason. There's just thing of like my own feeling mismatched with, like, it's like, there could be like a way that, I don't know, it could just be my own, like I'm not working like an office job. I'm not fitting into the stereotype of what an adult life is like. It's not even that. Like there are people who are like, if I, like, I'll just like admit it that I was at one point in time I was trying to use Tinder just to give it a go, but I was recovering from my health problems that I wasn't very confident about like going out and dating because I was just like the health. I'm better now, but the health issues themselves, there's things like that that affect your confidence about your body and your ability to be a stable, independent adult. And I was just not, but there's something about it where it's like, if there's something about like, like with rock music, how rock music is associated with being teenager or something like that, or like all your teenage friends go out to the rock show and that the lyrics are written for that kind of audience and it's all kind of about that. And like so if I match with somebody who is like, a cool creative type that plays in a band and all this kind of stuff, but it's sort of like, oh, well, this person has already like gone touring, has already put out records, has already established themselves in a scene, and I just feel like, I'm basically still, there's part of me that feels like it could be because I'm living at my family house, that I lived at when I was a teenager, and it just I'm like trapped with all these memories, or that there's something about living with my mom and my sister that it doesn't matter how old I am, I always feel like I'm treated like I'm a teenager, or that like this whole thing about like I just feels really awkward trying to date in this situation, because I don't want to be like go out on a date and have my elderly mother like calling me at like 9 o'clock being like, "Hi dearie, are you coming home tonight? Are you gonna go and like, are you getting laid?" It's like, you know what I mean? It's like there's something about this. I'm like, it doesn't, like, no. It's like I can't make that situation work. And then I feel like or like if I'm having some sort of interaction with somebody else the same age, I want to feel like we're on the same level. I don't want to feel like my life has been put on like I was having a life, and then I hit somewhere in my mid-20s, and then I've just been in this arrested development for a whole decade, and all these other people have done all these things, and I just have to like, and I'm, I want to just do what is right for me as an individual, and not feel like there is like my own redemption or my own salvation is tied to just conforming to whatever structure is the most stubborn and resistant, and saying, oh, if you, I think one of the things about this, what I think it could be one of the attractions to astrology for me, is that there's something about like, I don't think there's anything astrology has to be for women. But there's something, and like, I don't have any really interest in going in a trans direction myself, but I think there's something that maybe is part of the appeal towards transgenderism that has to do with the fact that white, or just, adult males have a certain kind of subjectivity, right? There's a subjectivity that goes with this identity, that you feel a certain expectation on you to be a certain way, even like, and this is it could be with Neptune, is because it's not like anybody in my life is literally telling me this, but that to be sensitive to the environment, or being sensitive to what other people are like, there's this expectation that you have to be a certain way. And then if you listen to, like, let's just say, I don't know, women talk, I mean, women could have their own different subjectivity, their own expectations about what they have to be like. That's completely different. But there's something about, like, you could, like, the majority of what an astrology audience is at with their collective subjectivity, and it's like, if you can even get to that point where you're interested enough to study this and listen to this, it takes you out, in some way I feel it takes you out of the subjectivity of all the expectations that are on you of just being a adult male, right? In the same way that Gilles Deleuze talks about the becoming child, the becoming woman, or that there's a kind of majoritarian structure saying that the majority are people who are able-bodied, who are able to drive cars, who work full-time, and that there's this sort of process of, and then people that don't have rock and roll bands, people that don't write poetry, people that don't, study ancient history. There's all these things that are just like outside of what this structure of the majoritarian is, right? And that's often associated with the archetype of the sun, because if you think about you can bring this back to astrological theory, because when the sun is in the sky, you can't see the stars. You can't see the planets unless it's right in the morning or the evening. The sun has this effect of just wiping out all the other stuff in the sky, and then when you're in the night, you can see the multiplicity, right? And so there's the yin has more to do with the multiple, and having whereas the solar or the day world has the effect of basically drowning it all out and asserting the dominance of the solar force, the solar structure, the solar, whatever you want to say it, the hero, the ego, all that kind of stuff. And like the thing, like what Terence McKenna was saying, is that it helps to have a sense rather than just surrendering the ego. Because like there's also this kind of funny this thing where I watched this movie last night called Lord of Illusions, which, to be honest, is a pretty imperfect movie. It's not, it's not really the best movie by any means. But there's a scene near the end of it where these people are these weird mystical cultists are having some kind of ecstatic experience, and they're like tearing their clothes off, and there's rain falling on them, and then what happens after that is they're like, these people are stuck in the mud. They're like everything hard. Like they go through this process of like the deterritorialization and the deterritorialization is like an ecstatic release. Like, I'm not bound to the limits of my rigid ego. I'm breaking loose. And then what happens is then it all hardens in on them, and they're like people who have been stuck into quicksand and they're like hardened into the floor, and now they can't move because the structure which had become loose had now just rigidified over them, and now they're like this horrifying caught in the thing that was previously fluid, which has now become hardened. And I think there's something about that which resonates with the Saturn and Pisces, right? But I'm just like, I think that there is some, like, I don't know about you if other people have the same reaction, and it's not, I don't know, it's not like, I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way as being like insensitive to people that struggle with suicidal ideation and stuff like that, but there's something that ever since I had my first psychosis, and I had a breakdown, that it didn't take very long for me to develop this sense that there is some force that is active in the collective. And I don't know if that's the world collective at large, or if that are certain communities, or if that is maybe even just things that are set off by specific astrological dynamics. But nonetheless, there's what Jung called the collective unconscious. There is some force active in the collective unconscious, meaning that it's not personal, that it affects whole societies. And it could very well have to do a lot with COVID and the pressures as a creative or an artist or even a musician at this particular point of time, that we feel we're not accepted, or that even the people that are successful, those are what really I find really concerning, is that it's even the people who are accepted, who are even successful as successful as you could expect somebody. If your project is going to be like, I'm going to start a gothy rock and roll band where I sing about my dark feelings and stuff like that, and you get good reviews and you go on tour and you respect it, like, that's as successful as you would expect you could get. And yet these people, not only are they not immune to this sort of voice that it's like some childish, infantile, regressive thing to play rock and roll music and be creative, but they're not only susceptible to it, they're even so affected by it that they're killing themselves. And like, I'm like, I don't know, I'm just like, can we look at that and just look it dead in the face and say, fuck you? No, I'm not going to listen to that voice that is like, because who is this father image? It's not my father. My father would have never told me to stop playing music or to stop being creative, or that I have to like amputate some part of myself to be an adult, acceptable adult. Like, that is nothing that my father would have raised me with. But there's some awful toxic force in the collective that, at least, like I'm saying, at least with, there could still be a bit of this trouble with Venus conjunct Saturn in Pisces, but there's definitely resonates, I think, with some of the doom and gloom, and that, like, or I don't know what the hell is going on with the guy from Sri Lanka that mass murdered a whole family. I don't know, man. But there's something about this. I think it helps to have a strong solar kind of ego in the point force that's saying, you know what, I may be intuitive, and I may somehow have some sense of these collective, currents, or these collective, forces and stuff like that, but I don't have to listen to the force that is trying to squash my creative spirit, that's trying to tell me to shut up, that's trying to tell me that my voice doesn't have a place, that's saying that I have to like conform to something that has absolutely nothing to do with me. That and so like I think I don't know. I'm basically making this video in an act of defiance, or to say that there's something that you like. There's something that should be just self-evident about it. Like Ramana Maharshi had this line that when it comes to like sin, that it's part of like the grace of awareness, of the intelligibility of life, that it's self-apparent that when there's something that's wrong, when there's something that's bad, that you can just see it as being wrong and bad, and you don't have to, and it's the fact that you can intuit the problem of it is part of like why the amazingness of life is that like these things are sensible, and that you can see that there's something there that is a force you don't want to hand yourself over to, right? I don't know if that's a bit counterintuitive, because Ramana Maharshi was all about killing off the ego and stuff, but even I don't know. I mean, I'm just pulling these ideas where I can get them right now, right? There is something else about. Well, okay, maybe there's other kind of things that I have in mind. But I will just leave it. Well, for some reason I'm having another hesitation of whether I want to go. There's something to do about. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm an aging millennial, and that there's this whole thing about the Zoomer generation being these kind of young people who are like making music and going out to like shows and stuff like that, and there's this like my kind of relation to the younger generation and seeing myself as more of an adult in relation to that. And one of the I think one of the prime examples, like I also have to admit I'm not feeling very cool, because I find that there's things that are trendy or popular I kind of find out about after the fact, because I'm really not plugged into the stream of what all the cool stuff is. But I have been starting to listen to this very Zoomerish band called Caro Caro Bonito, and I just think that there is at least maybe some kind of, like with the Venus, exalted Venus and Pisces conjuncting Saturn, there is some resonance here with some of the stuff that Caro Bonito is doing, namely their song about taking a break. Because I think we can still mitigate some of these energies, and rather than treating Saturn, like the whole myth of Saturn is like it eats its children. You don't want to be a child eaten by Saturn. You know what I'm saying? Like, if there's a way that we can mitigate this crazy old Titan who wants to eat all the children, maybe by not going that extreme, we can at least allow ourselves to take a break. That you can take a break, and that taking a break doesn't eliminate the creative process, but it can support the creative process. And there's nothing wrong with taking a break and chilling out once in a while, right? And I mean, I have to admit that, like, I don't know, I'm recording another hour-long video, but I mean, the creative juices were flowing, so, at this point in time, I'll figure I will just unleash this video on you all, and, maybe I'll take a break after this, but, that it's good to take a break, once in a while, and that can be a supportive structure, not this sort of like weird kind of like deranged Senex that wants to like take all the fun and creativity and joy out of your life, right? But rather you can have the things working so that Saturn force helps to complement, actually, right? And the thing, like, there's the way that things that might seem like obstacles can actually be supportive of the things they look like they're obstacles to, right? That just so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something you take. Saturn is often kind of taken as being an oppositional force, a antagonistic force, but it doesn't have to be a hard antagonism. It could actually be a kind of a overcoming resistance, or a kind of a limit that actually helps creativity rather than hinders it. Okay, thank you for watching this. Thank you for putting up with some of the gloomy, less than cheery subject matter with this video. But thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting the channel. All right, have a good day, everybody.